together better. You know, we have some stupid people.
Folks, I mean it when I say this. It's time to restore America's soul. It's time to rebuild the backbone of America, the middle class, and this time bring everybody along, no matter your race, your age, your religion, your gender, ethnicity, or disability. We can do this.
The interesting discussions of the weekend, and on we go 15 days to the election. Right now, John Sitilides joins us. He's with Trilogy, which describes a little bit about his public service to the Republican Party and particularly to the government, working, of course, with the Department of State over the years. John, thrilled to have you with us. Greg Valliere moments ago said Donald Trump still has a chance. That goes completely against the zeitgeist of the weekend. John, have we been here before? Is this like Vujade?
2016 redux, Tom. We need to be very careful here because the national polls to date have been largely meaningless in terms of how to actually win the Electoral College. And what you see now is the race tightening, as we all expected it would. And the next 2 weeks will be very, very determinant in terms of the 8 or so battleground states. And Biden has had this general lead in the national polls with registered voters and with likely voters. But what it really comes down to is, can he hold that lead in the last 2 weeks? To date, this election has been about persuasion of voters. But I think what you'll see the next 2 weeks, it'll increasingly be focused on motivation of voters.
Yeah.
And I think the Trump rallies demonstrate where exactly that strategy will be playing out on the Trump side for the next 15 days.
Where is the silent majority of 2020? Is it in the suburbs? Is it a certain demographic? It was written about over the weekend eloquently by the mainstream media. They're out there somewhere and they're ready to vote. Where are they and who are they going to vote for?
Well, they're throughout the country, mostly rural and suburban. Increasingly, we see larger numbers potentially of younger blacks and black men who are thinking about voting for Trump. Also an increase in the Latino vote for Donald Trump compared to 2016. He is faltering slightly with suburban women and also with senior citizens. And I think one of the weaknesses in the Trump strategy is they've talked about replacing Obamacare, but they haven't laid out a definitive replacement plan. And I think that makes a number of people, especially seniors, very nervous. But the silent majority is out there. It's silent, Tom, and I think that's what's confounding pollsters. And I think it's why the Biden campaign manager was very smart this past weekend to tell their supporters, this thing is going to get tighter and tighter. Do not get complacent. If Biden voters think that a 10-point lead in the national polls from June and July and August means victory in November, they're terribly mistaken.
But John, why is the majority silent? So is this a shy Trump voter, or does Trump regain them in the next two weeks? Like, what's the dynamic there?
The ones that I talk to tell me that essentially they have been, well, there's been an attempt to shame them into silence. They're socially marginalized. They're ostracized, right? You can't walk down a city street in a major metropolis wearing a MAGA hat or you'll be punched in the face. So they feel like they've been marginalized and isolated by larger society, by the institutions, but among their clusters of friends, the motivation is extraordinarily powerful. And I don't think Trump has lost a single voter from 2016. So he's got to hold on to that base. I don't know that he'll be adding many voters to that base, but I think the issue is, can Biden hold on to his lead, or can Trump persuade a number of voters to not vote for Biden, especially with the Hunter Biden email scandal? I think that's going to be a centerpiece of the Trump strategy for the next 2 weeks.
John, let's go to Florida. I mean, the political expert Francine Lacqua nailing the 50 states focused on Georgia is one example of a very, very close race. How do these two candidates pick up the critical, call it a broader minority vote of blacks and particularly of Latinos? What's the actual method to do that?
Well, in a state like Florida, we would look at two Latino groups, right? There's no large Latino blob, and I think we need to be careful about this. The Latino community is made up of a number of sort of distinct mini communities, and we have the Cuban Americans who tend to vote very Republican, and they're very motivated to vote for Trump, especially because he reversed Obama's outreach to Cuba when he became president. And also there's a very large Puerto Rican vote in Florida, and by Donald Trump investing in Puerto Rico, especially as a place to reshore very sensitive medical supply chains after we learned about China's dominance of that industry. That's coming to Puerto Rico. And so the governor of Puerto Rico has now endorsed Donald Trump. Two very important motivational factors for subgroups in Florida's Latino community.
John, can President Trump actually be reelected without the support of suburban women?
It all depends on what the percentage is. I mean, it's not as if there's a 100% rejection of Trump, but he is weak there. He was weak in 2016, and a lot of this is centered around suburban women finding his character rather repellent. The question is, I think he's going to come back and say, do you want your cities and your suburbs to look like Portland, to look like Seattle, to look like the gang-laden areas in Chicago every weekend where you have a number of people being shot and killed? Or do you want law and order? Do you want safety for your families and for your communities? And I think that's going to be the message Trump sends out.
Yeah, but we're 2 weeks to the election, so that's the message that he's done so far, and yet they're focusing on healthcare and still don't want to vote for Trump. So does he just have enough time to reverse that?
Well, I guess we'll see on election day. I mean, this is when a number of people actually begin to focus. There's still about 12 to 15% of undecided persuadables in the electorate. How many of those are in the battleground states will be a key to the Trump and Biden strategies of the next 2 weeks. But don't look at us. We've been focusing on this for the last year and a half. A large number of Americans will only be deciding in the next 15 days, and that's who Trump and Biden have to appeal to.
John, very quickly, how many do you think are undecided? What did you just say?
12 to 15% of the electorate is believed to be undecided. Yeah. We don't know how many of those are in the battleground states, though.
Yeah, 12 to 15. That's a huge number that I have not heard before. John Sitilides there, a geopolitical strategist at Trilogy Advisors, diplomacy consultant to the Department of State under contract. Now, up next, we track COVID-19 with Joshua Sharfstein, Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health Vice Dean. That's coming up shortly, and this is Bloomberg.